Our goal is to make Bat Week as big as Shark Week one day. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Shark Week on TV, so hopefully someday we can have a Bat Week on TV. But I strongly encourage everyone to go check it out. There's a lot of activities on there for kids and adults and many different things you can do. And the website is batweek.org. So if you ever have some time this week and want to join in on the Bat Week festivities, go ahead and check it out. So going into bats. So there are over 1,400 species of bats worldwide. And bats can be found on every continent except Antarctica. And these species are diverse in many different ways. There are insectivores, which are your insect-eating bats, frugivores, which are your fruit-eating bats, nectivores, which consume primarily nectar, and then your sanguivores, which consume blood. And since Halloween is approaching, we hear a lot about our sanguivores, and there's always a lot of worry about them. But I'm here to tell you that out of these 1,400 species of bats, only 3 of them are sanguivores in the world. So not that many are. And the ones that are found in Central and South America, and they primarily feed off of larger mammals like cows or deer. So you really don't need to worry about any sanguivores if you do decide to travel to South America. So of those worldly bats, about 47 species are found in the US. And the only fruit bats in the US are in the southern islands like the Florida Keys, or in US territories like Guam or American Samoa or Puerto Rico. And of these 47 species, only 3 of them are nectivores, and the rest of them are all insectivores. So they're all insect-eating bats. And a fun fact is that the Hawaiian hoary bat is the only land mammal that is native to the Hawaiian Islands. So then getting smaller and just focusing on Illinois, which will be most of my talk today, there are only 13 species of bats in the state. And the hoary bat is the largest of the species, which you can see here. And their weight is an average of 26 grams and have an average wingspan of 15 inches. So these bats are pretty small, and they have some distinct differences to them other than color, which we'll get into next. And we're going to go into the year of a life of an Illinois bat. So going into springtime, bats in Illinois are coming out of hibernation, and then bats who have migrated are returning, but we'll get more into that later. And bats are pretty hungry and will forage when the weather is good and their food source is available. But sometimes, it's springtime, there's bad storms, weather doesn't get good. Bats have the ability to go into what's called torpor, which is kind of a state halfway between a nap and hibernation. And this is where they can decrease their body temperature and their metabolic heart rate and conserve their energy for a few days until they can forage again. So they never have to worry about starving from a bad storm and not being able to eat. And so this picture shows a bat eating some bugs. So I'm going to ask you all, do you think out of these 13 species, how many of them eat bugs? If you want to put your answer in the chat, if you want to participate, and we'll see what some of your answers are. So out of these 13 species, how many do you think eat bugs? All right. Getting some answers in here. Looks like everybody's saying all of them. And you're right, I tried to trick you, but they all actually eat bugs. So they eat bugs like moths, beetles, flies, stink bugs, those nasty mosquitoes that we all hate. And the bigger bodied bats will consume the larger insects, and the smaller ones will consume the smaller insects. So you don't have to worry about sharing your blood or your fruit with any of these bats. They just want to eat all the bugs for you. So also in springtime, bats are preparing to give birth and are looking for a maternity site. So some bats will return to the same site year after year, while others will locate a new site yearly. And some species will prefer locations in trees, while others will locate buildings or caves. So all of the bats that are circled in purple here, they form maternity colonies. A maternity colony is a group of reproductive females that are giving birth and weaning their pups. And some of these bats can have large maternity colonies, like our gray myotis here, which can have hundreds of thousands of bats in their maternity colony, while other bats, like our silver-haired bat, will have maternity colonies of less than about 20 individuals. And these two bats circled in blue here, they're solitary with their pups. So they don't need any help from anybody. They're strong, independent women. They don't want to be associated with anybody else. So once summer rolls around, baby bats are called pups, and the pups are born. And the length of a gestation period on average for a bat is about 6 to 8 weeks. And pups will nurse for about 30 to 40 days. And pups are altricial, which means they're completely dependent of their mothers until they're about 80 to 90% adult size, and their wings are fully developed enough to fly. So these are some pretty dedicated mothers here. And the young of most species start flying between late June and mid-July in Illinois. So our next question is, how many pups can we have in a year? So if you want to put your answer in the chat, how many pups do you think bats can have in a year? All right, getting some answers in here, ranging from 50 to 2. All right, good guesses. So it's actually species, it varies by species. So our bats circled in red here have 1 pup per year, only 1. And then our bats circled in blue here have usually 2 pups per year, twins. And then our bats in green are strong, independent females. They usually have 2 to 4 pups. And these bats also have 4 teats in order to give more nutrition for their offspring. So on average, it's probably going to be 1 pup per year, but some of them can have 2 to 4. So once fall comes, mating season takes place. And bats exhibit what's called delayed fertilization, which means they mate in the fall, but the sperm is stored in the uterine tracts and through winter, and ovulation and subsequent fertilization occur in the spring. So how awesome is that, where you kind of just get to sleep through your whole pregnancy and then you wake up and you have a baby. So sounds pretty sweet to me. And hibernation occurs from October to early April in Illinois, but not everybody is preparing for hibernation at this stage. So at this time, some bat species are migrating great distances. These bats in red can travel over 600 miles, and they're either traveling to get to their hibernacula, like our gray myotis here, or they're traveling so far south where they can be active year-round and they don't hibernate. And then our bats in yellow migrate to their winter hibernacula, but much shorter distances, usually around 60 to 300 miles tops. They're not big travelers, while our bats in blue usually stay in the same location. So their summer roost is the same for their winter hibernacula. And once winter rolls around, the bats in Illinois will hibernate through the winter, but some species will wake up throughout hibernation and move from cave to cave or so. It just depends on the species. So with that, that ends the first part of our talk. So now getting into the ecological benefits that bats have. So bats maintain insect population, and they have direct and indirect effects on plant and animal communities. And they're also great ecological indicators of habitat quality and great seed dispersers. So I have a small food chain here showing you where a sphinx moth will eat the Virginia creeper, and the eastern red bat will eat the sphinx moth, and the great horned owl will eat the eastern red bat. So if you take the eastern red bat out of this equation, it can pretty much mess up this little ecosystem I have going on here. So you can have an overpopulation of sphinx moths because nothing is there to eat them, and then they'll eat all the Virginia creeper, but then the sphinx moth won't have anything else to eat. And the great horned owl, if it has nothing else to feed upon, it'll probably move to a different location. So bats are a great indicator of how healthy a habitat is, because bats need water, they need trees, they need insects, so you can tell how healthy your ecosystem is if bats are in the area. And bats are also really beneficial when it comes to biological pest control. So a recent study done from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale estimated that globally, bats provide about $1 billion of crop protection for corn alone, and about, I think it's $23 billion for pesticides globally. And so corn rootworm remains one of the greatest insect pest threats to corn in Illinois. And 150 big brown bats can consume enough adult cucumber beetles in one summer to prevent the production of 33 million rootworm larvae. And so corn rootworm control costs about $25 per acre to do what big brown bats can do for free. So this is saving farmers tons of money in pest control if they have a good, healthy bat population. And just going into some global benefits, so these aren't exactly in Illinois, but also just good benefits that bats have. Like I said before, that they're great seed dispersers, but they're also great pollinators. So they pollinate over 500 different plant species, and this includes species like mango, banana, guava, and agave. And fun fact, agave is the plant that is used to make tequila. So if you're a big tequila drinker, you can thank your bats for that, because without bats, there would be no tequila and there would be no margaritas, and the world would be a much sadder place. And there's also medicinal benefits that bats have. So when vampire bats bite, their saliva releases this enzyme called desmodoplasm, which is, when it's in the bloodstream, it causes the blood flow to be more readily available, and it's capable of breaking down blood clots. And so Draculin is this name of a new drug that's like currently being tested to see if it increases the 3-hour window that doctors have to treat post-stroke clots. So it's still being tested, but it's really cool information, and it's really cool to see the benefits that we get from bats and all of this information that's pretty new to us. But with all of these benefits also comes threats. So now I'm going to get into some of the threats that bats are facing. So one of the first threats is habitat loss. So bat species depend on forests and either for roosting or foraging, and there is less than 1/3 of forests than that of pre-settlement times in Illinois. And when bats are looking for a good roost tree, they're looking for old growth trees. So this is trees with peeling bark, loose bark, hollow trees. And some bats, like I said before, the big brown bats have adapted to roosting in buildings, but there are also dangers with that as well, like extermination and entrances getting blocked off and old buildings collapsing. So it's just kind of one of those things. And there are also pesticides, and bats can be exposed to pesticides in many different ways. So they can inhale the toxin, they can eat the prey that was exposed to toxin, they can drink contaminated water, it can be in the mother's milk and then harming the pup. And even pesticides that were banned back in like the 70s, like DDP, have chemicals that will continue in the environment for decades. And these toxins can affect the thermoregulation of the bat and the coordination. So when they're flying, they can lose their direction easily, and it can be fatal. And so the Bats of Illinois book says it perfectly, where it would be both unfortunate and ironic if chemicals used to kill insect pests have harmed bats that provide free pest control. And so as you can see from this graph here that I've posted, this is a formal pesticide misuse complaints. And you can see it jumps dramatically from 2016 to 2017. And now I can't tell you if this is actual misuse that jumped or just education on misuse and more people reporting that misuse. But either way, these are some pretty high numbers. So it would be great if we can decrease the misuse in the state. And wind turbines is another threat that's affecting bats these days. So all energy has some sort of environmental impact, and this includes wind farms. So the first wind farm was established in 2003 in Illinois. And today, wind turbines provide about 7% of the state's generated electrical power and rank 6th among states for installed wind turbine capacity. And a study done in Bureau County, Illinois, found on average that about 3 bats per turbine per year were killed in a facility. And this is estimated to be about 800,000 deaths per year in the US due to wind turbines. And so bats die from injuries when colliding with a moving blade, as well as lung damage. So when the blade is moving, it creates this rapid drop in air pressure. And when a bat enters this area, their lungs expand and they can't exhale quickly enough, and this causes hemorrhaging. And the greatest mortality of bats due to wind farms are high-flying migratory bats, like our eastern red bat and our hoary bat. And now there are studies being done all over the nation on this threat, and some wind farms are even turning off their blades from sunset to sunrise to reduce the mortality rates. So there's a lot of research being done on this. And another threat is white nose syndrome. So white nose syndrome is caused by a fungus, and this is a mouthful, but it's called Pseudogymnoascus destructans. So it's PD for short. And this fungus grows on hibernating bats while they're hibernating in the caves. And it grows, as you can see, on their muzzles, so white nose, that's where it got its name, and wing membranes as well. And what happens is, while this fungus grows on the bats, this fungus causes all the bats to use more of their fat stores that they've had prepared for hibernation, and it essentially causes a high mortality rate. So when researchers go into caves after a winter, they're finding thousands and thousands of dead bats that have used up their fat stores to get rid of this fungus and this disease. And so it was first discovered in New York in 2007, and it was first discovered in Illinois in 2013. So to just give you an illustration of how fast this disease spreads, this is one of the first maps that was ever created back in 2010. And you can see in the red circle, that's where it was first found in New York. And here is a map in 2014 of where the disease has spread. And this mostly is caused from bat to bat. So bats are very highly social creatures. And it's like any other disease where higher numbers, higher likelihood of transmission. But bats aren't the only culprits. So as you can see in this picture here in 2016, white nose was discovered in Washington, and that's believed because there's a major port there, and so humans caused the disease to spread that way. And here is a picture of where white nose syndrome is today. So this map was last updated, I think, in 2019, but as you can see, it spreads pretty rapidly throughout the country, and lots of studies are being done on white nose and how it's spread. So going back to our bats of Illinois, all of the bats that are circled here are bat species that have identified diagnostic symptoms of white nose syndrome. So all of these bats have been found to have the disease and have been affected by it. While our red circled bats are PD positive, which means that they found the fungus on the bats, but they haven't found the diagnostic sign of the disease, white nose syndrome. So these bats might just be helping the spread, unfortunately. So in Illinois, we have our 2 bats here circled in blue. These are our threatened species, while our bats circled in red are our endangered species in the state. And this is from the Illinois Endangered Species Protection Board, and it was last updated May this year. So now I'm going to switch things over a little bit and talk about the misunderstandings about bats and diseases. And I just have this short video I'm going to play for you all before I get into this topic.
Hendra, Ebola, Marburg, SARS. These are some of the world's scariest viruses. Hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola are extremely fatal. They kill up to 90% of people infected, while SARS, a coronavirus, has a lower mortality rate but spreads incredibly rapidly. All of these nasty pathogens have surfaced in humans in just the last 50 years, and they are all carried by bats. Which, to be clear, really isn't bats' fault. The recent rise in outbreaks is likely due to humans and our animals creeping ever farther into bats' territory, especially in the tropics. In Malaysia, for example, the spread of commercial pig farms into bat-inhabited forests led to the first human outbreak via pigs of Nipah. And in Australia, human Hendra cases are cropping up as destruction of native forests forces fruit bats to feed in suburban gardens. But still, bats do appear to carry more human-killing diseases than pretty much any other animal. One big reason is that, with a few notable exceptions, bats love company. Different kinds of bats often roost together in huge numbers in close quarters, which helps viruses spread, not just between individuals, but also between species. What's more, most infected bats don't die. They live pretty normal bat lives, flapping around and giving the viruses time to spread. In fact, flight may be the reason bats are so resilient to infection. As a rule, mammals can't produce the immense amounts of energy needed for flight without also producing a lot of reactive waste products that damage our DNA. So when our bat cousins took to the air, they leveled up their in-flight DNA damage repair kits and other defenses, including specialized cells that keep viral invaders in check. So bats can survive the deadly viruses. But what may matter even more, for humans anyway, is how the viruses survive the bats. Nasty as they are, most viruses are also extremely finicky. In order to thrive, they require the perfectly controlled climate inside a normal resting on-the-ground mammal. But when bats take to the air, their internal temperatures cruise to around 40 degrees Celsius. Those frequent in-flight saunas are far too toasty for your average virus, but a few hardy viruses have evolved to tolerate the heat, which incidentally means they can definitely weather a meager human fever. Essentially, flight may have helped bats gain virtual immunity to viruses and train viruses to be virtually immune to us. Stupid flying. So what should we landlubbers do? We need bats for insect control and pollination and a whole bunch of other things. Maybe we could even learn some immune tricks from them, like how to be really good at not getting cancer. Plus, bats aren't the biggest carriers of human disease. Humans are. Just do the math. Perhaps we'd be better off leaving bats alone and trying to control the spread of diseases carried by a different kind of flying mammal.
All right, so that's just a little bit about bats and diseases. And that video was made back in 2014. So this is not a new video, and this unfortunately isn't a new problem. But there's a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to bats and diseases. So scientists have found that COVID-19 is 96% genetically similar to another coronavirus that was found in horseshoe bats back in China in 2013. But this means it's the closest relative, but it's not the same virus. So this 4% difference in genetic code suggests that the two viruses share a common ancestor from over 50 years ago. So what we do know is that there is zero evidence that bats can give you COVID-19. It's just a known fact now that COVID-19 is a human disease spread from human to human at this point. And the fact that bats do carry a diversity of coronaviruses, have presumed tolerance without getting sick, provides us with information to know how their immune systems function, which can help us and help learn about how we can develop these vaccines as well. And one of the biggest problems is, besides habitat loss, there's wildlife trade and wet markets. So in these areas, animals are together in close proximity that usually would never be together in a normal world. They usually never relate with each other. So you have bats next to pangolins, you have bats next to snakes, all of these different. So when bats have a disease and they're introduced to all these other animals, it's easier for that to spread. And unfortunately, a lot of it is due to human cause. Okay, so now we're going into the Illinois Bat Conservation Program. So the Illinois Bat Conservation Program was established in July of 2016. And this is what I'm the assistant coordinator of. And we work with many different people. There are many different moving parts. And we collaborate with the University of Illinois Prairie Research Institute, Eastern Illinois University, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and we have our principal investigators, Tara Hohoff and Mark Davis. And then we had grad students who recently just graduated and came out with some awesome papers that I can send out and link to. And then we have our current master's students, Sarah and Jordan, who have just joined us. So we're really excited to have them on the team as well. So the main goal of the Illinois Bat Conservation Program is the conservation and management of Illinois' 13 bat species. So basically, we're trying to answer three main questions, among many other little questions, but our three main questions are: which species of bats are present in the state currently, where in the state are they found, and where do they reproduce? And we use many different methods to try to answer these questions. So one of the methods is called roost emergence counts. And it's to better understand bat populations in Illinois. Observers will sit at an angle where they can easily see bats flying out of their roost and count the exiting roosts, the exiting bats, for about an hour after sunset. And sometimes you'll sit with different people at different angles and then count and then average your number out. And this method isn't perfect, but it allows us to return year after year to monitor roost population. So when I say this method isn't perfect, it's very hard sometimes to count the number of bats coming out of a roost. So I invite you now to watch this video of us doing an roost emergence count and see how many bats are coming out of here. And if you want to put your answer in the chat of how many bats you think are exiting in this video. All right, go ahead and put your answer in the chat if you think you know how many bats exited that roost. All right. Getting some answers in here. So the answer is either 3 or 4. So we're just looking at who's exiting, but it's very hard because sometimes bats are foraging, they're eating insects above the roost and they're flying in circles and it can get a little chaotic up there. But at least this way we can get a rough estimate of how many bats live in a roost. So another method we use is acoustics. So using acoustics, this is actually recording echolocation calls. So for those who aren't familiar, bats echolocate, and what that means is they're letting out this really high-pitched, high intense, almost scream. And what they're doing is waiting for a lower frequency echo to be returned. And this information helps them to know if a bug is nearby or a tree or an obstacle that they need to fly around. It's how they navigate. And so what we have are acoustic detectors and microphones that are able to pick up these sounds, because human hearing is about 15 to 17 kilohertz for the average adult, where the lowest range for an Illinois bat is around 20 to 25 kilohertz. So they're much higher frequencies than we can hear, which is probably a good thing, because I'm sure nobody wants to like hang out outside and hear a bunch of very obnoxious screaming all night long. Nobody will want a bat in their backyard because of that. But we are able to have these devices that can show us their sounds, which is very cool that we can see sound. And these microphones only pick up echolocation calls, so they don't ever listen to what you're saying, or if you have music playing, they can't hear any of that. They're just listening for bat calls. And so we have different acoustic setups in our studies. We have stationary setups where a microphone and a detector are attached to a pole or a tree or something, and they're left out there for 1 to 2 weeks. And then the detector turns itself on at sunset and records through the night, and then turns itself off during the day. And then we also have mobile transects where a microphone is attached to a detector in a car, and we drive a mobile route for about an hour and a half at 20 miles per hour and see what we can pick up during that mobile transect. So this is a map of what we currently have going on for our acoustic work. And as you can see, we have 20 different sites here. And within each site are yellow stars. That's where we will put one stationary detector in each quadrant. So northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, one in each of those. And then we'll drive a mobile transect to get a good idea of what's going on in that quadrant. So what we can find out from acoustic monitoring, this is a great method for finding out presence and absence. So before we can do anything else, or if we want to do any other methods, if we put a detector out there and no bat calls are getting picked up, there's pretty much a good chance that no bats reside in that area, and we can move on to another location. And then you can also sometimes identify by species from acoustics, but that's much harder to do because a lot of bats will have the same frequency or the same shaped call. But you're also able to do a lot of other things with acoustics that's pretty cool. So this is an example of what we see from our spectrograms. And these are through Wildlife Acoustics and Sonobat. So these are the programs that we use to identify calls and process calls. And so you can see here, you can physically see when a bat is searching for prey, and when it approaches, and when it's actually eating its insect and then going back into a search call. So it's very cool that you can see this information. And then we upload our acoustic data to what's called NABAT. It's the North American Bat Monitoring Program. And I highly recommend you check it out. It is available to the public, so you can see a bunch of different data from all over North America on what bats are doing. So just to give you an example of some acoustic work we've done, we have done surveys with the Champaign Forest Preserves back in 2017 and 2018, and we were able to show when bats were most active throughout the night, as you can see from this first graph here. And then we're also able to see which bat species are more active throughout the night and classify them that way. And we can also manually vet, which is when we're physically looking through each call and looking for the call characteristics that each species has. So you can see the northern long-eared myotis, they kind of have these long swoops. They don't have any kind of shape to them, while our big brown bat is kind of more of a J call. So it's pretty cool that we're able to identify some of these species this way. So once we know that there are bats in an area after using acoustic methods, we're able to misnet. And misnetting is when we set up this giant mesh net, as you can see in this picture, and it has like 3 shelves. And you can stack them up to be double, triple high. And usually we put them over water because when bats are swooping down to get a drink, they don't really notice that the net is there and they get a little distracted. So we're more likely to catch them that way. And when we catch bats, we gently take them out of the nets. The net doesn't harm the bat, and we're professionals taking bats out and being very delicate with them. And then we're able to see what species the bat is. We're able to identify sex. We're able to take measurements and get the weight of the bat, see the external health of the bat, just much more information when we can actually catch them. So, and then if we want to know exactly where a bat is roosting, we can radio track the bat. And so by misnetting, we're able to know the area that bats are in, but if we want to know exactly what tree it's in and know, where it's sleeping during the day, we can do this method of radio tracking. And it's all pretty simple, where we just cut a little bit of the fur off of the back of the bat, and we attach this transmitter using some surgical glue, and we check to make sure the frequency matches. So you can see in this video right here. And making sure that the transmitter is on pretty well. And then they're ready to go. And these transmitters fall off the bat in usually about 2 weeks if it doesn't fall off earlier. Sometimes it falls off earlier or we lose a signal, something like that, but the surgical glue is only made to last about 2 weeks. So the transmitter's not on them for life or anything. And they're about like 0.3 grams, I think, so they're not very heavy for the bat at all. And so once it's on, it's kind of like a giant game of hot and cold in the wild. So we're listening for these beeps in the next day. And as we get closer to where the bat is roosting, the beeps will get louder. So it means we're going in the right direction. And if they get quieter, that means we're not in the right direction. We need to go back to where we were. So it can take a lot of work, and it really helps when you have a team of 2 or more to try to figure out where exactly the roost is, but it can be pretty fun. And then it's a lot of fun once you find out what tree it's in and get all that habitat data. And then there's also guano collection and metabarcoding. So new advances in technology have allowed us to identify things such as diet composition, species, and sex. And how we do that is we collect a guano sample, a poop sample from the bat, and store it in these vials with a label. And then we're able to extract the DNA, the environmental DNA, from that guano sample. And essentially we get this, it's kind of like a biological name tag, and get a lot of information out of these name tags. So it's very cool what new technology has allowed us to do in research. To how to help bats from your backyard. So there are many different things you can do to help with your bat population in your backyard. If you want to have a bat population there, you can provide a water resource. So something as simple as a bird bath is good for them, just having a place where they can go and drink. Very beneficial. You can leave your dead trees. Dead trees provide a food resource and a roosting location. And also keeping cats indoors is one of the big ones. So there was a study that found that predation by cats was one of the first causes for rescue bats that were submitted into wildlife rehabilitation. So just something very simple as leaving your cats indoors can really help bats out. And you can also build a bat house. So bat houses are pretty popular these days, but sometimes you want to make sure you're being very specific for your building and installation. So bats are super, super picky. They want the right size, they want the right color, They want the right placement. They're very hard in real estate, so be lucky that you're never selling a house to a bat. But just things like bats want their bat house to be 15 to 20 feet high and not on a tree where predators can get them or branches can fall on them. They want like a pole or something that's in just the middle of nowhere. And then you want to have a bat house not facing north. So your bat house needs to have at least 6 hours of sunlight. And it may take over a year for a bat to roost in a bat house, and they may not even roost in it at all. If they do have the healthy habitat around, it's much better that they use that than use the man-made object. But sometimes you will get bats that live in your bat house, and congratulations for having a healthy bat population there, because sometimes it can be really difficult. But if you want to just buy a bat house instead of building one, we highly recommend that it's Bat Conservation International certified, so BCI certified. And if it has that, that means that it marks all of these boxes and it's good to go. So there's more information on bat houses on batcon.org if you want to ever look into that. And you can also become a citizen scientist. So if you have bats on your property, if you have a known roost, we would like to know about it. And you can message us at illinoisbats.org. We have a lot of information on there, but you can do an emergence count survey. So like that video I showed you before of sitting and watching how many bats come out of your roost. And then you can also do a guano sample collection, and you can find out what species are living in your roost. And so if you fill that out, we contact you, we send out all the information, all of the necessary equipment, and then you send us back your guano sample, and then we're able to send out a newsletter in the next year telling you what species are there. So that's pretty cool. And then as always, you can help by just spreading the word. So talking to your friends, if anybody sounds scared of bats or they think bats are gross, just letting them know how much they do benefit the environment and benefit us is a big help as well. And that's all I have. So now I can answer some more questions you guys have.